Tonight, pullback propaganda. U.S. officials accuse Russia of lying about a military troop withdrawal from the border of Ukraine.
We are concerned that Russia is trying to stage a pretext for an armed attack against Ukraine.
And
I am calling again upon Israelis in Ukraine, come home.
Israel joins the U.S. and other countries in urging their citizens to leave Ukraine. Plus, as COVID cases drop, states across the country are ditching mandates for mask wearing.
We will get back to normal.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A stark warning from President Biden on the situation in Ukraine. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. In Washington, D.C., I'm Jenna Browder. The president now saying Russia will likely invade Ukraine in the next several days. It comes as satellite images show more Russian troops amassing on the border. The Kremlin, though, still insisting it's pulling troops back.
They have not moved any of their troops out. They've moved more troops in, number one. Number two, we have reason to believe that they are engaged in a false flag operation. They have an excuse to go in. Every indication we have is they're prepared to go into Ukraine. My sense this will happen within the next several days.
What we do know is that Russia has amassed the biggest force we have seen in Europe for decades.
NATO leaders say thousands more Russian troops have reportedly joined the ranks of some 150,000 already surrounding Ukraine. As heads of state and NATO urge Vladimir Putin to choose diplomacy, a fresh attack on a Ukrainian kindergarten raises concerns of what will inevitably provoke war. And joining us again tonight from Lviv, Ukraine, CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas. George, what is Putin's calculation here? Is Russia just trying to create confusion, or is this an attempt designed to hide some sort of attack?
Well, this is part of the Kremlin playbook, right? We saw it in 2004 when they were amassing their troops along the Georgian border after outrage from Western countries, from NATO and from Georgian officials. They pulled back, and then about 8 days later, they went in and took South Ossetia and Abkhazia, in essence, taking a chunk of Georgia. They did that again in 2014 in the eastern part of Ukraine, when they supposedly sent in these little green men, as they were called, and they denied that they were part of the Russian army. Well, that's 8 years later. We all know that Russia has complete control of the eastern part of Ukraine. It's part of their playbook. But the reality is that we have, unlike the war 8 years ago, we have Twitter, we have TikTok, we have satellite imagery. We've got people with cell phones all over the place, including in like places like Belarus and in the eastern part of the country. So people are taking videos, and obviously the U.S. intelligence is relying on satellite imagery. They're taking constantly, flying their operations over the country and the region. And so they can see the evidence. And clearly from the Ukrainians, the UK, the US, the State Department, they're all saying that there is no evidence that Russia is in fact pulling back its troops. If it's pulling back, it's moving its forces to other areas of the country.
Yeah, today we learned that Russia's expelled the U.S.'s second highest diplomat from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. George, how big of a deal is that?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, Mr. Gorman's expulsion came last week, and we're only finding it out today. According to the Russians, this is basically a tit-for-tat. The U.S. expelled the U.S. expelled a leading Russian diplomat a few months ago from Washington, D.C. And Russia today said, Moscow said today that this was in retaliation for that. So obviously it comes at a time with all of this going on, with 150,000 troops along Ukraine's borders. So it comes at a tense time. But again, this is the back and forth between our two countries at the moment.
George, are we already seeing attacks on either side of the border?
We are. In fact, I think for for those in the public, in the American audience, this is a big deal. Today, the Ukrainians say that the Russian-backed separatists hit among a number of targets, including a kindergarten. The Russians say that in the last 24 hours, Ukrainian soldiers have been firing about 4 times into the Donbas region. The NATO and those who are monitoring that area say that is an outlandish accusation. But, keep in mind, Jenna, this has been going on for 8 years. 14,000 Ukrainians have died in the process of this, what I would call a frozen war. It's still going on, but it's something that has continued to take civilian casualties. Fortunately, there's no reporting as of today if anybody died in these attacks on both sides.
George, this week yesterday, we saw Ukrainians take to the streets to mark Unity Day. What is the feeling among Ukrainians this evening?
Well, I think across the country there is this sense of, they don't know, they're not making preparations as if there's an invasion that's on the horizon. I was just in Kyiv the other day. I've been talking to sources in Kharkiv, which is on the northeastern part of Ukraine, very close to the border. I've got contacts who are right there, about 10 miles, less than 10 miles from the Russian border. I've got contacts in Mariupol, again, about 10 miles from the Russian front line. There's no sense of panic at all. Even in Kyiv, there's no sense of panic whatsoever. But the question people are constantly asking, they're saying, what is the pretext? What is the reason that Russian forces would even dare to come into Ukraine? What is the reason? And so far, there is no reason. And that's why today the president, from the State Department to the president of the United States, continuing to say that Russia is looking for a pretext, looking for a reason to come in. Perhaps the escalation in the east is one reason, but also what's interesting, I'm seeing a lot of traction on this whole idea that there is a quote-unquote genocide taking place in the east is something that is we're seeing more and more coming from Russian officials.
All right, George Thomas, tonight in Lviv, Ukraine. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
Well, tonight the Ukrainian government has questions for Israel over why Israel is asking Russia to help evacuate Israeli citizens. This as the U.S., Israel, and many other nations urge their citizens to leave Ukraine. Israel, though, taking it one step further, making plans to help not only Israeli citizens, but thousands of Ukrainian Jews who may be caught in the crossfire. Here's CBN's Chris Mitchell in Jerusalem.
On Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett called on Israelis in Ukraine to leave. I am calling again upon Israelis in Ukraine, come home. Don't take unnecessary risks. Don't wait for a situation where you really want to come back, but it will be impossible. Be responsible for yourselves, leave Ukraine as quickly as possible, and come home. But Israel is concerned not only for its citizens, but also for the tens of thousands of other Jews in Ukraine. Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, is involved in that effort.
So I have been in touch with the leadership of the Jewish communities in Ukraine. They are confused about their future. We told them the gates of Israel are always open for every Jew to come.
But Danon says even in the face of an invasion, it's a difficult decision.
But it's not easy to relocate your family when you have a connection to your community, a job, elderly parents. It's not easy for them to come and just pack their things and move to Israel.
Yael Eckstein, head of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, just spent time on the ground in Ukraine.
I felt all of the unknown of what will be in the future there, but what was very clear to me is that there's a thriving and strong Jewish community in Ukraine that isn't going anywhere so quickly.
In February 2020, CBN News accompanied 130 Ukrainian Jews who made Aliyah to Israel. Even now, the work goes on.
Continuing our operations, rain or shine, no matter what's going on. And there are those who have always dreamed about making Aliyah and are jumping on this time now to move to Israel.
The state of Israel has a long history of rescuing Jews during dangerous times. With well over 100,000 Russian troops on the border of Ukraine, the Jews in Ukraine may seek Israel's experience in their hour of need. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, states across the country dropping mask mandates. what that means for kids in school. Well, as COVID cases across the country continue to drop, more states are ditching mask mandates. The CDC expected to loosen its indoor masking guidelines next week, and mandates are being lifted across the country. In Virginia this week, Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin signed a bill that ends mask mandates in public schools and lets parents choose for their kids.
Today we are reestablishing and restoring power back to parents. But we are also reestablishing our expectations that we will get back to normal.
And joining us now is Penny Nance, President and CEO of Concerned Women for America. Penny, welcome. Great to have you with us today. Thanks, we just heard from Governor Youngkin. That was just Governor Youngkin there. You know, is this the beginning of the end for mask mandates in schools across the country, Penny?
Well, Jenna, this 2022 is the year of the parent. We had parents that were stuck at home during the pandemic who learned shockingly when their schools were closed down about the, terrible nonsense gender theory, critical race theory that was being, really anti-Christian dogma that was being taught to their children, and they woke up to it. They were awakened. And so this is just really a follow-on of that. The fact that suddenly kids were finally allowed to go back to schools, but the teachers union said, no, we want them masked. Well, now we've seen the fallout of that. We see kids who are speech delayed, who are having trouble learning, and it's always the least of these, the kids who are in the underserved communities who suffer the most when bad decisions are made at the top. And so parents have awakened and stood firm and elected Glenn Youngkin and his incredible team, our Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears and Jason Miyares, our Attorney General, and they came in swinging and in Virginia have cleaned up things. But, at Concerned Women for America, we've been leading on this issue. We've been at our school board meetings. This is a key issue for us that we want parents to have control of their children's education. We don't lose our responsibility, our authority, our freedom when we drop off our kids at school. And unfortunately, the left believed that we did. We even have now seen San Francisco changing their position with the recall of some of their school board members. We are seeing a revolution of parents, and it's about time.
Penny, I want to switch gears here to talk about the transgender athletes. Leah Thomas formerly competed as a male for the University of Pennsylvania, now swimming as a woman and breaking records. I'd like to get your thoughts on that and what it means for women in sports.
You're right. So Leah Thomas, who was formerly known as Will Thomas, was number 462 ranked nationally when he says she's she, so she's a trans woman. It's a little confusing. But Leah wants to be called she. So she was 462 when she swam as a man. Now that she's swimming as a woman, regardless of whether you do testosterone blockers or whatever, he is predisposed to beat the women, and he's first. And today, he just broke national records at the Ivy League championships. And this could go to the NCAA championships and very quickly coming up in Georgia. But this is devastating to women's sports. If we're allowing men, biological men, who, by the way, are chromosomally men from the womb, they will take women's trophies. That means they take their scholarships. Even women on the left have linked arms with Concerned Women for America on this point and saying we worked hard for Title IX, for civil rights, for women to have their own sports, our own things, our own safe spaces, domestic violence shelters. Women who are incarcerated deserve to be protected from men, and the left is tearing down all of those barriers. It is, even Swimmer's World said this is a betrayal of women.
South Dakota is now the 10th state with a law to officially protect female athletes. Penny, does the sports world need to wake up to, what it means to have trans athletes in women's sports? Just a few seconds left.
Absolutely. They have to wake up, but I think they are. We just had one of our young Women for America leaders who's an athlete, testified in Kentucky. Her name's Hallie Gravely. We have young women standing up and saying, protect our sports. We still want there to be single-sex sports for women because otherwise we can't win. Men are biologically predisposed to take our trophies, and it's not fair.
All right. All right, Penny, we have to leave it there, but it's always good to see you. Penny Nance with Concerned Women for America. Thank you. And we'll be right back. When Donald Trump entered politics, he became a lightning rod that split the Republican Party. Today, the former president remains a contentious figure in the party and a major player, too. CBN News chief political analyst David Brody reports on the factions within the GOP.
The days of Ronald Reagan seem long gone in today's Republican Party. The iconic Republican president was fond of saying that the person who agrees with you 80% of the time is a friend and an ally, not a 20% traitor. Well, that's certainly not the case today within the GOP. The 2020 election changed everything.
Mitch McConnell didn't have the courage to challenge the election.
And with that, dividing lines were drawn, with Republicans like Congresswoman Liz Cheney on one side.
We must speak the truth. Our election was not stolen.
And Senate candidates like Ohio's Josh Mandel on the other.
I believe this election was stolen from Donald J. Trump.
Mandel and many others believe that is the winning stance in today's GOP.
There's only one candidate in this race for U.S. Senate who's willing to say that the election was stolen from Donald J. Trump. And I'm willing to say that because it's the truth. And I have guts and backbone and a steel spine. And I don't care if the liberal media attacks me.
Mandel seems to have strong backing on that side of the GOP. Current polls show 57% of Republicans saying they will not vote for any GOP candidate who agrees that Joe Biden won the election fair and square. And then there's January 6th. Recently, Trump said if he runs and regains the presidency, he'd look at pardoning those convicted of crimes at the U.S. Capitol that day. Republican Lindsey Graham strongly disagrees.
I think it's inappropriate. I don't want to reinforce that defiling the Capitol was okay.
Trump fired back.
Well, Lindsey Graham's wrong. I mean, Lindsey's a nice guy, but he's a rhino.
And so that's where we are in today's GOP. Republican congressmen who have been reliable conservative votes over the years are now called rhinos. Republicans in name only. The label has been bestowed on U.S. Senator Mitt Romney and others who joined Democrats to pass the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. I asked Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDowell about the name calling in a recent interview.
So how do you kind of define rhino? I feel like that's changed over the years. Do you think that definition has changed in recent years? It seems like who was a rhino years ago.
I'm not as into dividing right now because we need everyone to go in against the Democrats. And I know everybody focuses on inter-party stuff, and that'll work out in the primaries. The RNC has to stay neutral in primaries.
Yet the RNC clearly recognizes where the momentum and energy is right now in the Republican Party. And that's why there is a proposal to remove Republicans Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger from the House Republican Conference due to their vocal support of the January 6th committee. The big mo, as in money, is also squarely with Donald Trump. His political operation starts the year with $122 million in the bank, much of it from small donations. It appears his post-election rhetoric has made him stronger. Some candidates running in the midterms credit Trump for changing the GOP message.
It's become more of a populist party. It's no longer kind of like your grandfather's Republican Party.
And thank God. Unfortunately, the generations before us took pride in voting for conservatives, took pride in voting for Republicans, but they were getting the wool pulled over their eyes in Washington, and people were just voting down the line for people that essentially sold them up the river, moderate Republicans that would vote with the Chamber of Commerce and totally abandon some of what we find as core morals and ethics.
Even President Biden understands Trump's gravitational pull, which he believes has prevented him from getting Republican support.
Did you ever think that one man out of office could intimidate an entire party where they're unwilling to take any vote contrary to what he thinks should be taken for fear of being defeated in a primary. I've had 5 Republican senators talk to me, bump into me, quote unquote, or sit with me, who've told me that they agree with whatever I'm talking about for them to do. But Joe, if I do it, I'm going to defeat it in a primary.
I discussed the state of the GOP with Pennsylvania congressional candidate Kathy Barnett.
How do you see the Republican Party? Is Trump kind of a litmus test for Republicans today?
You know, I mean, some say they are, but listen, we have, D.C. is a swamp, and in every swamp you have alligators, and you have some alligators that are on a rock sunbathing, and then you have other alligators that are right up on you. Democrats are the alligators that are right up on us. So we need to be real focused, real clear. Don't focus on the alligator on the rock sunbathing. Focus on the alligator that is right up on us and is about to destroy our country.
There's no doubt something is in the water that's led to a shift in the Republican current. The question remains whether it will lead to the much talked about wave that could retake the majority in November. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Finally tonight, it is National Random Acts of Kindness Day, and this story is full of them. 4th grader Adrian Harrell heard about 2 electrical engineers who rescued a man from the New York subway tracks back in January. Adrian rallied his whole class to write thank you notes to the heroes. But the kindness doesn't end there. MTA workers Walter and Blundo were so touched by the letters that they made a surprise trip to meet their fans at the special request of Adrian's teacher.
Adrian had the whole class write letters to them. That was all Adrian. It was not teacher-led at all. He was telling them what to write to them, how to respond to an MTA hero. So he really brought this amazing kindness project to us.
And good for Adrian. Well, the subway heroes met their fans and graciously took all of their questions, keeping the kindness rolling on this random Acts of Kindness Day. And that is going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you right back here again tomorrow. Have a great evening.